Hey, it's Warren Coughlin here. Welcome to another episode of the Business That Matters Spotlight, a podcast dedicated to spotlighting entrepreneurs who combine business discipline and a desire to make the world a better place through entrepreneurship. And today should be a pretty fascinating conversation. I'm not sure where it's going to go, as our guest has led such an interesting and adventurous life. Steve Whiteside, founder of the Franchise Leadership Center. He's an entrepreneur, a coach, educator. He's run 7 business colleges at one time. He's a PhD. An addict, as he describes it, who's been 17 years sober. He serves on the boards of many charities, including the chair of the ALS Society of BC, president of Shriners in BC, and he's a family man. So this is a story with some pretty strong lessons in it that I think many entrepreneurs are going to learn from. So Steve, welcome to the Spotlight.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Warren. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to it.
That's great.
So I always think it's kind of a way of thanking people for tuning into a podcast like this by giving them something right out of the gate rather than doing a bunch of warm-ups. So if you could give one tip to an entrepreneur who's really trying to live the life they dream of, what would that be?
Well, probably the one tip would be help the people around you do everything they want to do. Help them accomplish everything they want to accomplish. That's putting it into a nutshell, I guess. Yeah.
First, I like that.
Yeah.
All right,
not
Steve,
too complicated, but it works.
So I want to hear more about your trajectory and what got you here. But first, just what is the Franchise Learning Center? What do you do? Who's it for?
Well, the Franchise Leadership Center is really an organization I founded while I was doing my PhD and doing the research about franchisees. I was a franchisee and I had a lot of frustrations. I had a lot of issues. I did quite well, and my franchisor did quite well, but there was different frustrations and issues than my other businesses that I owned. So I ended up focusing my research on franchising and franchisee and franchisor relationships. And I said, boy, there's a missing gap here. There's a million people that go out there and sell franchises, help you market franchises, help you buy franchises, but there's nobody out there really helping you just do better in your franchise. Yeah. And as a franchisee, I saw the gap clearly. And so I started the Franchise Leadership Center. And really, it's just been a lot of fun. It's a consulting organization where we help franchisees get the most out of whatever they want to do. And we also have franchise-only forum groups that we're really starting to move and have people be a part of. And it's a really exciting part of our business. Yeah.
So you have 2 parts of it. Like, what? So the groups are one thing. What did it start? Like before you did the groups, how were you doing it? Just through consulting or coaching, one-on-one?
Yeah, it really started out consulting, one-on-one coaching. I'm a coach. I'm an executive coach, and I'm a PCC level coach through the ICF. And I really enjoy coaching. I really don't.
That's the International Coaching Federation.
Right, at the International Coaching Federation. I don't enjoy consulting as much as I enjoy coaching, because consulting, you know the difference. You've been there. You've done both. They call you in. They want all your feedback. They want to know everything you have to share with them. You give it to them. They pay you and they do nothing. And that's been my experience with consulting. So Coaching is a lot more fun, because coaching, you get to sit down with a person and really find out what they want and where they're going. And, my philosophy is what a lot of coaches are. The answers are usually within the client, but you have to help the client find those answers. So that's what I started doing with franchisees, really finding out what franchisees were missing, what was bothering them, what was keeping them up late at night, and then just helping them find some answers for that. And they usually did all the hard lifting. I just asked the questions, gave a little bit of input, and really just helped them explore what they were doing. And it worked really well. And that's what I did for many years. Until we grew the company a little bit. I brought on a partner named Alex Reed, and we decided, listen, the one thing that I've never heard of is franchisee forums. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of forums out there, great forums. I was a member of an EO forum for 13 years. That's entrepreneurial organization.
Yeah, I'm a sponsor of one of the chapters too. I've been a sponsor of 2 different EOs.
Good for you. Yeah, that's great. It's a great organization. I suggest it to anyone. I did notice when I was an EO, though, franchisees were a little bit different than the average entrepreneur, and sometimes looked at differently by the average entrepreneur. So, when I looked at that, and I know that I was a member for 13 years, I wondered why there wasn't anything for franchisees. And so that's when I got together with my partner. I said, let's start franchisee-only forums where we can bring 12 to 14 franchisees of non-competing businesses together and have them work together. So we facilitate the once a month meeting, and we help them bring their issues to the table. We help facilitate coaching sessions. We help facilitate sharing of experience. We help facilitate all those things you get at EO and WPO and Tech, which is another great organization, the executive committee, but we do it for franchisees only.
And when you said non-compete, do you ever do like a forum of a bunch of franchisees from the same franchise system, or is it always different organizations that are in a forum?
Well, right now, it's always been different organizations. We've been in discussions with some franchisors who said, we'd really like you to come in and think about setting up a franchise group just for our organization. Just bring in 14 of the same people from the same organization. And we haven't done it yet, but we've talked about it. We've talked about doing it virtually. We've talked about doing it in person in big franchises that have, maybe 20, 30 franchises in the same city. But right now it's just non-competing. So we could bring in more than one restaurant, but we couldn't bring in more than one fast food restaurant and one, maybe a higher level of dining restaurant, like a dine-in restaurant. We wouldn't bring in two of the same competing because the big thing about forums is it's very confidential, and you want to be able to share everything. It's I always said when I was in my forum for 13 years, it's like that. It's like your coach, your psychologist, your wife, and your best friend all rolled up into one.
That's right. Yeah, people who haven't experienced it kind of don't know what they're missing, because there's a strange kind of combination of professionalism and intimacy that exists in those forums.
That's a great way to put it. There really is. And what else can you bring? A really difficult issue. Maybe it's a challenge. Maybe it's an issue to a table with 12 to 14 other people, and have 12 or 14 other people who are skilled, understand franchising, and want to help you. I mean, it's unbelievable. You can't buy that kind of input, but our members get that kind of input just from their other members inside their franchise forum.
Now, just as contrasted to some of the other forums, like 12 to 14 is a relatively large number compared to like what EO and some others do. Do you find that more valuable? Is it more difficult to manage? How does that play out?
Well, we've had smaller forums, but we find that 12 is really a magic number. We say 12 to 14 because every now and then a forum wants to bring on somebody else, wants to maybe try to bring in a new industry. They'll say, hey, we have no one from this industry, and they'll want to bring someone on. Really, although we facilitate the forum because we're trained at facilitating forums, and we want to make sure people get the most out of their 4 or 5 hours once a month, they run their own forum. If they want a new person, they have to approve who comes into their forum. So, I think anywhere between 8 and 12 is probably a very magic number. And if we do have a full forum at, let's say 12, right now 12 is our largest. It tends to work very well. It tends not to be a problem. I know in EO, we were always looking for somewhere between 8 and 10. That's what we were looking. Our forum group was always looking for 8 and 10. Because if you lose a forum member and you're at 8, then you're down to 7 or 6. And we really want to have enough people around the table that we're really sharing a lot of ideas.
Yeah, you want that energy.
Exactly. Also, a lot of forums decide they want to have a retreat maybe, and they want to go somewhere for the weekend and do some communication skills and some sharing and maybe a lifeline or something like this. When you have 10 people or 12 people, you can really get a lot done, and you can learn so much in 2 days. It's really unbelievable. The power of forum and the power of these retreats. People's businesses and their lives, they really change overnight. It's quite amazing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is there a certain size that your franchisees have to be at in order to participate? Do they either have to have a number of years of experience or a certain number of employees, or can it just be somebody right out of the gate?
Well, we have a vetting. We have kind of a vetting interview is what we do. So because we're not like an EO or a Tech that we have hundreds and hundreds of people in forums, we just do it one-on-one. And we sit down and we do a free coaching session, and we find out who they are and where they're at. What we don't normally bring on is brand new franchisees who have no business experience. Because although they may need us, they won't be able to share in a way that's fair to the rest of the group. So we want to make sure that it's a matter of giving and taking. So you're going to take a lot from the group, but we want you to give a lot to the group too. So normally, most of our franchisees have been in the business for a minimum of a couple of years. They own a lot of our franchisees are multi-owners that own many franchises, because nowadays that's the franchise model, as you know. A lot of franchises are going to multi number owners. So, we try to keep the group similar size. So what we've mostly specialized in is medium-sized organizations that do anywhere between $1 million to $10 million, $6 million. And I say that it sounds like a big gap, but in the franchise world, it's really not, because it's a lot of selling of widgets or food or things like that where the revenue can go up quite high. But the size of the business and the number of employees is generally somewhere between 10 and 25, per franchise location.
Right.
So that's kind of what we do. We are looking at starting a forum group. We haven't done it yet with much larger franchises who do much more business, maybe everything from a car dealership to some of the larger companies that do, tens of millions of dollars. But right now we have had no problem where everyone's fit in really well in the same forum group.
Nice. Yeah. Well, the structure lends itself. Like there's, WPO and EO even has a larger group organization. So it's just so long as the people can, like you say, contribute to each other,
Exactly.
have the experience and wisdom to be able to support each other, but they're sort of within the same sort of snack bracket.
That's exactly it. And they have to be able to give back. So we've had some people that I say, the forum's really not right for you now. But, if you want to maybe do a little bit of coaching, or if you want to work with another organization for a while and come back and speak to us in a year and a half, let's see where you're at with how you've grown and where you've come from. I mean, I have a couple of examples where I've just sat down and I've talked to people for the next year and a half for free. I just talked to them and we met every now and then and enjoyed just working together and having a couple of lunches. So, I love what I do. So
that comes across. Well,
yes.
let's talk about you for a second. We'll come back to a little bit more about the organization.
Yeah.
But you've got such an interesting background, and
Okay.
I was really impressed with how candid, in our previous conversations, you were about past struggles and stuff like that. And I just, was interested if we could start there or before there. Like, how and when did those challenges manifest in your life? Were you a kid? Was it older?
Well, let me tell you, as interesting as my story may sound to some, it's probably very similar to many entrepreneurs. So I believe my story starts back when I'm 8, 9 years old. My parents get divorced. I'm struggling in school, and I become a real pain in the neck to everyone around me. And why is that? Well, I got diagnosed at about 9 years old as a slow learner. And I couldn't sit still. And now back then, that's what they called it. Your son won't sit still and he's a slow learner. But that's really not a proper diagnosis.
No.
No. And so as time went on, I just
strike me as a slow learner. So there'd have to be something else.
Yeah. Well, I just don't learn like everyone else. I find out later, and I'll give you that story a little bit later, but I have dyslexia. So I was diagnosed with that very, very much later in life. But back then, they didn't know what it was. So I just decided for my mom, I got along with my mom very well. She was a single mom who raised me and I raised her. And I stayed in school and I said, I'm going to finish. I'm going to graduate. So I did graduate. I went through remedial courses and easier courses because the way that I learned wasn't the way that they teach. So I graduated high school, and because the classes were so easy, I was a bit bored, and I just wanted to always do something. So of course, as most people do, or a lot of people do when they're younger and they don't know what else to do, they turn to things they probably shouldn't. So when I was very young, I started doing drugs. I started smoking marijuana, which obviously for a young person is definitely a gateway drug. And I started experimenting with more, harder drugs in my 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And that really started changing my life a bit. And I noticed it. As a young man, I noticed that I was having problems. I was missing work because I always worked as a kid. I was a dishwasher. I was selling magazine subscriptions door to door in Oceanside. I was always doing something, and that was getting.
As a side note, do you find that a common story? Like, I hear a lot of entrepreneurs like, "Oh, I started working when I was young, and I had my own route, or I did this." I hear that all the time from people who became entrepreneurs, is that somehow they got into doing something early.
I think you're right. And I think it's because entrepreneurs want to do something. They want to accomplish something. And if they can't do it through the normal mainstream at school and high school, they're going to create their own thing. They're going to get a job. I mean, I used to sell when I was in 11th grade, I sold 5-year contracts for 7 magazines.
Nice.
They were like $600 magazine subscriptions, and I was a kid, so I would go door to door. I would talk to people. I would sell it to them, and then I would drop it off at a corner. And then a few hours later, an adult would come by and pick it up, go to the home and close it and sign the contract, because I was too young to sign contracts. So they would go and close it an hour later or 2 hours later. There was no cell phones or anything back then. So you just drop it off in an envelope at a corner and someone goes and picks that up. It's a funny story, but it was great. I just loved it. I loved going door to door and talking to people. and in selling something that most people had a hard time selling. So that's kind of where it all started. I just started using drugs. I started doing things, but I always tried to keep my head on straight. So when I graduated high school, I decided that's not the way I wanted to live anymore, and I stopped using drugs. I went to a drug rehabilitation place. I got my act together, and I moved to Israel. Actually, I was 19 years old, and I moved to Israel and spent a year in Israel. Which I tell you, if you
Can I just interject 1 second? You skated over that as if it sounded pretty easy, but like,
yeah.
what was the trigger that made you say, "Wait a sec, this isn't the right path to be on"? And then, was it how challenging was it to actually just leave that behind?
Well, I got to tell you, I'm really a true addict. So when I set my mind to something, I'm pretty good at it. So it was tough. I had to go to drug rehab. I had to get some of the drugs out of my system, and that's always the hard thing in the first few days. And I made a decision. I went to a 12-step program, but it was for kids. It wasn't AA. It wasn't NA. It was called Freeway. It's a very interesting setup, and it was a very It was very good for me. There was a whole bunch of It was 150 other kids, and everybody wanted to be sober. And I went to it. I found a new group of friends, and I fit in, and I did well. I set my mind at it, though. That's exactly the theme I think you'll hear from a lot of entrepreneurs. They'll say, "I set my mind at it. I decided I was going to do this. I decided I was going to do that," and that's what I did. So, that's what I did. I'm Jewish. So, at 19 years old, what a lot of Jewish people do is they go to Israel. So I got sober. I spent about 8 months sober in San Diego, where I grew up, and then I went to Israel for a year. I worked in the banana fields. I inseminated turkeys. I picked dates. It was great. It was the hardest work I've ever done in my life.
You inseminated turkeys? Now that's a new one to me. I never even heard of that as a job.
I won't tell you what my title was, but I inseminated 2,000 turkeys every morning for for many months.
Wow.
Yeah, because we raised fertile eggs. It was a very profitable farm. And so it was a kibbutz, of course, and it was tough. We started at 3 o'clock in the morning. You're talking about a Jewish kid who grew up in San Diego, who never changed a tire on a car before, and I go to Israel at 19 and start inseminating turkeys at 3 o'clock in the morning.
That sounds like exacting work. So.
Yes, very good. It was. It was tough. It was good, but I grew up a lot that year, and I came back to the United States, and I was a little lost. You come back from working like that in another country, and you come back to the United States, and I was a bit lost. I moved to Los Angeles, and I was determined to do something. So I got a job serving papers. I got a job serving summonses and subpoenas in a little city called Watts. Have you ever heard of Watts?
I have.
Well, I never did when I was 21 years old. And so they asked me if I would serve papers in Watts, and I said, sure. Little did I know, it's a pretty tough ghetto in Los Angeles. So it was tough. I immediately asked for a transfer, but I worked there for 4 months serving papers, unlawful detainers and different papers at people's houses. And they tell me the only reason I lived was because they thought I was crazier than them. Because having a white guy knocking on the doors of someone's house in Watts, you got to be crazy. So it was a crazy 4 months, and I didn't mess with anyone. Sometimes they'd say, if you give me that, sir, I'm going to kill you. And I would say, okay. And I put it back in my pocket and I walked away and I wished them a good day. I wasn't tough, and I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just trying to make a living at 12 or 13 bucks an hour plus $3 a service. So, that was a lot of fun. But I realized very soon after that a regular job wasn't in it for me. It just wasn't. So I said to my mom, who worked in the education business, I said, can you get me into the admissions department? My mom was always a salesperson in the admissions of private colleges. And I knew that's a sales position. Although it's helping people and it's working with people, it's sales. And she got me my first interview when I was about 21 years old to work in a school in downtown Los Angeles. She says, if you're going to learn this business, Steve, I want you to learn in a tough spot. So she put me in what they call a ghetto school at the 8th and Hill in downtown Los Angeles, working with young people from East Side, Compton, Watts, all those areas. They would all come into the bottom of downtown Los Angeles. And they call the school that?
Well, did they still use the terminology ghetto schools, or is that sort of
that's the ghetto school back then? I don't know why. It doesn't sound very politically correct, obviously, but that's what they referred to us as, that, because A ghetto is an area. It's just a small area where people live. It has some really bad
Yeah.
connotation because of everything in the United States where we have very poor ghettos, in Europe when we had ghettos and Jewish ghettos during the Holocaust, but it's an area. So they called us the ghetto school because we were dealing with people from these small areas that really couldn't get into university, couldn't get into a regular city college, and they would come to us and they'd get some. This is right when word processing and computers started out. We had some of the first PCs that were ever around in 1987. 1988, and we sold classes on WordStar and things like that, a little bit of computerized accounting. And that's really where my career took off. I was by far the youngest admissions salesperson they ever had, and I did really well, and I really enjoyed it. I loved sitting down talking to people and selling, just like I did with the magazines, where the people would invite me in their house and we'd have a glass of lemonade and talk, and I'd sell them some magazines. I sat down and talked about people's careers and their futures. So that's why I always consider myself, forget the PhD, forget the education, the academics, the research. I'm a salesperson. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a salesperson. And
you said something earlier on this that I think is an important point to draw out. Like you said, my mom was in sales, but it was really about helping people. And I always find it interesting that people think there's a distinction between those two things.
I agree.
Whereas I'm actually a firm believer, sales, now there's a qualification. Sales, when done well and when done properly, is actually professionally helping people to solve their problems.
That's right. That's right. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations who sell things that people don't need or sell things in ways that are not ethical have used the word salesperson more than other organizations. It seems that if you're going to do something in sales and it's really helping people and being ethical, they try to find a different name for it. But I agree with you. Sales done properly is a service. It's probably one of the oldest services we've ever had, maybe the second oldest service we've ever had. And so I think when done properly, not only are you selling a service that someone needs, but you're helping them buy the service in a way that's comfortable for them. And that's what I did. I worked with people who came from very difficult areas and helped them find a way out of that area. And I can't tell you over the years how many people that I've helped and how many people that I can just sit down and talk to who their parents haven't been to college. Their grandparents haven't been to college. They never thought they could go to college. And all of a sudden they realize, wow, I can go to college and I can get some grants, some free money from the government or this or that. And I can do something for myself. And it's amazing when you give people a chance, what they'll do. In these ghettos and things like that, people don't realize these people don't have a choice. That's where they've been raised. That's where they think they belong. I used to serve papers. They're called unlawful detainers, and I would read them before I served them. And people were being kicked out of apartments and houses where they were paying the same amount of rent, if not more, than some of the nicer areas in the valley in Los Angeles.
Really?
Wow. Do you realize you could drive 15 miles this way and have a much nicer place in a much safer neighborhood with a much, more acceptable way of life? And they just don't know it. No one's told them. They've never left that area before. So helping people open their eyes to see that there's other options was something that I think I fell in love with. And I did it right there at 8th and Hill in downtown Los Angeles. And I've been doing it ever since.
Then, so you were doing that, sales for the school. So what did you pursue first, your PhD or your entrepreneurship?
Oh, so my entrepreneurship for sure, because I couldn't do anything else. So what I did was I met a wonderful lady named Dory who I married, and she was Canadian. So I moved to Canada. Now, the great thing was I was pretty good in the United States, but there's a lot of competition in Los Angeles. So I was good at what I did. And the school business, the private school business, was about 20 years ahead of Canada. So when I moved to Vancouver, I had skills that they never have seen before when it comes to private colleges and admissions and ways of marketing schools and packaging courses and things like this. And I found another entrepreneur named Ben Winland, who to this day is my mentor, a wonderful man. And I said to him, listen, I can really grow your company. I can really grow it. I can make your schools much larger and we can open many more schools. And he looked at me like I wasn't a crazy American. He was from Saskatchewan, lived in BC. And he looked at me, yeah, right. But he gave me the chance. He said, okay, come on up, move up here. I'll give you a job and we'll see what we can do. And we had an argument on our very first meeting because he says, what are you making? And I told him what I was making. He says, well, I can't afford that, but I think he offered me somewhere around $55,000 back in 1989, which was a pretty good coin for a brand new job for I think I was 23 years old at the time. I said, I don't want that. I don't want that. Please give me the minimum around $22,000 and give me 1.5% of everything that we do. And he punched it all in his calculator and he said, that's not going to work, Steve. You're not going to make $55,000 this year. And I said, I may not make it this year, but we'll make it. We'll do well. And we argued about it for a while and he ended up agreeing. I just asked him, I said, never change my comp plan. Never change it. He said, I won't. He said, if you 1.5%, if you're making a lot of money, I'm making a lot of money. And let me tell you, I'm going to jump ahead. I worked for him for 10 years. He never once tried to change my comp plan. And I was making a couple $100,000 as a very young man, a couple $100,000 a year. It was great. He was a wonderful man. We opened up 4 more schools, and we took his schools from being under $1 million to being $4 or $5 million a piece. But the place was right, the time was right, and I was lucky. So yes, I had some skills and I loved what I did and I worked hard, but it was a brand new industry in Canada. And so, it was the right time to get in. I firmly believe that you need to work hard, you need to be smart, but you also have to be lucky in life too. And
although it's interesting, but there's a concept that, I don't know if you know, there's a fellow named Shane Parrish who's written a couple of really interesting books. And he has an excellent podcast himself. But he talks about how luck is often a function of positioning.
yes,
What you want to do is you can't predict the future. You want to be positioned to either take advantage of an upside or to be able to handle a downside. And if you're, and so what you did, like by skilled, this is one of the things I always try to convey to entrepreneurs myself, is that the more that you develop your skills in sales, in management, in culture building, in market, like identifying market opportunities, the more you're going to be able to appear lucky, because you're just going to be in the right position to take advantage of something when it comes by.
That's a great way to explain it. I agree. I mean, they always say that people who work the hardest get the luckiest. I think it's because of this positioning you're talking about. They're there, they're ready to jump onto it, they're ready to take advantage of the situation. And they usually have people around them who want to support them, and that's key.
And it isn't, but the distinction is, like, it's not always, because some people just think it's all about grinding hard work all the time. And there's people that work really hard, but don't get that luck or success because they haven't actually done, grinding away for 30 hours on one skill you have without ever developing more skills doesn't put you in position to take advantage of the next thing.
I agree. Yeah. It's a good point. It's a really good point. Yeah.
And so what's your PhD
in? Human and organizational systems. So you want me to share with you how I ended up going back to school?
Sure.
Because it's kind of an interesting story, and it's, for me, it's inspirational. And sometimes I travel, and it's one of my talks that I give as a keynote speech, but I won't make this a keynote speech. I'll try to give it to you in a couple of minutes. But as you know, I have dyslexia, but I was always a slow learner. So that's what I thought I was a slow learner. So hence my life goes on. I get into entrepreneurship. I end up buying some schools, and we can come back to that later. But I have a child who's in first grade, who's waking up every night screaming, doesn't want to go to school. She's unhappy. She's having nightmares. And we didn't know why. It was a real problem. It wasn't just scared. It was real fear that she would wake up with in the morning, crying when we didn't know why. So we took her in to get some psychoeducational testing. And they said at the end of the 3 days of testing, can we talk to you? And I said, sure. And we sat down and they said, no problem. Your daughter's got a thing that we call dyslexia. She's got it pretty severely, and it's not a problem. It just means that she learns differently than other people do. So what's happening is they're all trying to put her through this one hole, but she needs to go through a much different size hole, or a square rather than a hole. And there's a lot of things available out there, and there's some schools that specialize in this. And luckily, I was working for Ben, like I told you, and I was making a fair wage, and so I could afford to give her a special school. And so that's what we did. But when I was about to leave this meeting, the doctor said, can we speak to you on your own for a minute? My wife was with me, and I said, sure. And she left the room, and my child left the room. And she said to me, she goes, has anyone ever diagnosed you with anything? And I said, well, other than being a pain in the neck, not really. And she said, really? And I said, no, really. I said, well, in education wise, I'm a slow learner. I was diagnosed at a very young age, probably 9 or 10 years old, as a slow learner. And she smiled, and I said, is that funny? I didn't quite get what she's saying. She goes, you're not a slow learner. And I said, how do you know? And she goes, well, there's not such thing as a slow learner. That's not a diagnosis. And I said, well, this was the doctor at the school, the speech therapist, everyone that I worked with. They said, I'm a slow learner. They go, no. They go, we can't diagnose you now, but we've been sitting with you for 3 days, like hours every day, testing your daughter and watching you. You would probably have dyslexia, just like your daughter, and you definitely look like you have ADHD. And I said, what? And she goes, that's what we would see. And if you'd ever like to come back and get tested, just come on back and we'll be happy to do it.
Hmm.
So I kind of put that on the back burner and took my daughter to the special school for dyslexic children. Within 6 months, she was reading at her level, typing 60 words, 50, 60 words a minute, and loving school. I
Wow.
couldn't believe it. It was just a change because they taught this thing called Orton Gillingham. It's a certain system of teaching for dyslexic children. And so I said, wow. And I watched her for the next year or two, and she just impressed me so much. I said, maybe I'll go get tested because maybe I'm not a slow learner. And I went back and I got tested and I was dyslexic again, like her. There's severities of dyslexia. I had a very severe dyslexia. Mine's not about reversing things. Mine's really about memory and how I store things in my brain.
Mhm.
So I was dyslexic and I watched my daughter for about 4 years really just blossom. So I said, I'm going back to school. At this time, I owned 5 colleges. And I really didn't need to go to school. I was an entrepreneur. I was an EO. I was doing my thing, but I wanted to do something. I wanted to learn because they always told me I couldn't learn. So I applied for a master's program at a university called Royal Roads University, which is a government university here in BC.
Yeah.
It's actually quite famous across Canada. And I applied to go without a bachelor's degree. And they said sometimes you can do that if you have the right experience and you're an executive, because it's more of an executive MBA. And I applied and I got permission and I went back to school. And I loved it. I did great. I did great grades, but I understood the concepts. I understood the research. They did in this master's that you actually had to do a dissertation. And, I did a 250-page dissertation over 2 years. And it was the first time I did real research on franchise organizations. And I loved it. At the end of the 2 years, I said, I got to do more. And that's when I said to the university, what about a PhD? I'd love to do a PhD. And they said, but Steve, you don't really need one. You're an entrepreneur. You're not. I said, I want it. I want to do it. It's crazy, but I want to do it. And so they sent me to a school in Santa Barbara called Fielding University. It's been around for 70 years, and it's more of an executive school too. Really great students there. Executives go there. People with a lot of experience in business go there. And I went there. And I loved it. It took me 4 years. I earned a second master's, one in human and organizational development, and my PhD in human and organizational systems, where I did a lot of in-depth research on franchise organizations, franchise relationships, and things like that. So it was my daughter who got diagnosed with dyslexia and did so well, who motivated me to go to school to get my master's and my PhD. Now she's in high school at this time, watching me struggle getting my PhD, working 8 hours, 9 hours a day in my office on the weekends and things like this. And when she graduated high school, she said, Dad, guess what? I said, what? She goes, I'm going to go to school and get a PhD. I said, what? She goes, I watched you for 5 years. You did such a great job. I just loved it. I want to do the same thing. Now, this is my daughter with dyslexia, right? So long story short, she went back to school. She got her PhD. She had to go to private colleges, but she can't pass any of those SATs with dyslexia. She can't get some of the things that she needs to do. But she went to a school in Los Angeles to get her bachelor's degree. And then she went to the Chicago School of Psychology, a very well-respected school just for psychology. And she got her PhD there. And now she's practicing, working with students, working with clients and doing a great job. So it's a great story of motivation through family, by me getting motivated by her when she was a child and going and getting my education, her getting motivated by me, and then she goes and gets her education. And it's really kind of a story we like to share and we like to tell people about.
It's a great story.
Thank you.
Yeah, lots of entrepreneurs hope to inspire their kids, but a lot of them are inspired by their kids as well.
Exactly.
Now, given your education, so you and I, we're both in the game of helping entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to riff a bit on kind of what do you see as some of the most, like this is almost an unusual opportunity for the audience here who are entrepreneurs. We got 2 business coaches here. What do you see as some of the most important blind spots that entrepreneurs face? That if they get help on them are real needle movers.
Well, there's no doubt in my mind, as I deal a lot with medium-sized entrepreneurs and smaller-sized entrepreneurs and a lot of franchisees, the number one blind spot or the number one challenge I come across is they get in their own way. And what I mean by that is it's a lot around leadership and emotional intelligence. So, of course, most entrepreneurs are quite wise, quite smart, and they believe, they don't always say it, but they believe they can do everything better than the people around them. And in some cases, if not more, they can if that was their only job.
Right.
But the problem is that they have many jobs and they have many people working for them. So I've always found that the focusing with most of my entrepreneurs that I deal with is around emotional intelligence, which, by the way, I dealt a lot with in my academic studies. And I don't know if I ever shared with you the story about my mentor when in my first job. I can share that with you later if you want me to. But I had to wake up. I had an aha moment one day where I learned that if I didn't change my life and the way I was treating people, I wasn't going to make it.
Yeah, tell that story. I think you did tell it to me, but I think I had a note to actually ask you about it because I think it's a really important story from a couple of respects because
Mhm.
it's like it sort of reveals the importance of mentorship, about feedback and how people take it, and if the right kind of feedback from the right person is given, how it can change things around pretty dramatically. But there's also how that feedback, like a lot of entrepreneurs have employees who pose them challenges.
Mhm.
So it's a good example of what somebody who cares can do.
That should be the title. Someone who cares, what someone who cares can do. And so I'll tie this to your question where you said, where's the blind spot? For me, this is my blind spot. And I was lucky enough to have someone who cared, who wanted to help me be a better person. So I worked for this college in BC in Canada. I came from Los Angeles and took on the job. And like I said, we grew the company huge. We went from about $1.5 million to 12, $14 million in very few years. And it was great. I was always getting accolades. People were tapping me on the back. It was sales. I was taking my sales teams over to Hawaii and Mexico and cruises and having a great time every year. And every time my boss called me in the room, he was usually patting me on the back. He was usually saying, great job. What's the next goal going to be? What are we doing next year? One day he called me into his office, but he didn't look quite as excited. So I wonder what it is. Do we have an issue? But nah, probably not. It's probably something great again. And so I go into his office. I knock on the door. I remember the office in the corner of the building. I knew exactly where I was. This story, this situation is something I'll never forget. And I said, Ben, do you want to talk to me? And he said, yeah, can you close the door? Have a seat. So I closed the door behind me and I had a seat. And he never asked me to close the door. Because he always has great things to say to me, you know? So I knew that there was maybe a problem with someone and maybe someone did something wrong. I had to fix it. And he looked at me and I said, so what's wrong? What's up, Ben? Is there a problem? And he says, yeah, there is. And I said, what's the problem? And he looked at me right in the eye and he said, nobody likes you.
Ouch.
It was an ouch. I almost wanted to laugh, but he was way too serious to laugh, you know? And I said, what? What do you mean? He goes, nobody likes you, Steve. And I said, sure, they all like me. We're doing great. We're breaking records. We're having fun. It's wonderful. And he goes, well, people are working for you and they're scared shitless of you because you're a pretty aggressive young man. I was about 26 to 27 at the time. Um, but nobody likes you. And I got to tell you, things are great right now. So it's not a big deal, but things won't always be great. You're going to have problems. We're going to have problems. And if nobody likes you, everyone's going to drop off the bus. Not only is that going to be bad for you, but it's going to be bad for me because I own the company. And I said, wow, what do you mean? And he goes, Steve, you tell people what to do and they do it, but you never ask people a question. You never see how they're doing. You never look into their lives. And I said, well, I'm busy. We're growing this company. He says, Steve, the people are the number one thing we have going for us. They're the people who do our business. They're the people who make us our living. They're the people we enjoy talking to. They're the people who will go on years past they work for us. The people are the most important asset we have, and you're not treating them right. And I said, wow. I said, I don't know what to say. And he goes, I don't want you to say anything. I want you just to take that. And we're going to talk more about it later. I want to know what you feel about that. So pretty much the meeting was over in 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And I left his office and I was crushed. At first I was pissed and I said, screw him. If he doesn't like it, I'll go look for another college. That's what we do. Us people who don't want to take a look inside and just want to, I'm the best director of admissions and director of schools that is in the city. Everyone in the city knew me by then. I knew every school, CDI, Sprott Shaw, all the different colleges that were around. And so I went home and I thought about it. And I realized something snapped in me and I decided, you know what? He's always been right with me. He's always been fair with me. I'm going to take him for his world, and I'm going to see what I can do to fix this. And just, I don't know what it was. I'm so grateful that it snapped in me, but it snapped in me. Instead of arguing with me, I'm going to try to find out how I can fix this. And I'd say a week or two later, it didn't happen for a little while. I sat with him and I said, Ben, I appreciate you saying what you said, and I would like to change. And he goes, if you want to change, I'll help you out. And we sat together all the time for every week, every month, for years. I worked for him for 10 years, and this was about 3 to 4 years into working for him. And he shared with me what I could do. And I got to tell you, luckily I listened, and I enjoyed my job so much more. We kept growing, we kept doing well, and the people around us enjoyed their job that much more.
And what did you do differently?
What's that?
What did you do differently?
Well, amazingly, if I look back in retrospect, it was emotional intelligence. It was the things that the father of emotional intelligence, Daniel Goleman, talks about. It was communication. It was empathy. It was listening. It was making sure that people understand you, not hear you, but understand you, and you understand them. One of the biggest things he taught me was, how do you make sure that people around you get what they want? Because that's one of the biggest tools I've ever learned. Some people want a promotion, so help them get that promotion. Some people don't care about a promotion. They want a home, so help them get that home. Some people want to have a better relationship with their family, so find out how you can help them get that better relationship. How can you give them some time off every single week or every other week so they can go and do a family project with the family? Find out what people need, what makes them tick, because what makes people tick is different for everyone. And that's what I started doing. Now, I made many mistakes, many mistakes, but I would say within 2 to 3 years, I was a different person. Even Ben said, Steve, you really embrace this. You understand this. And I think it's who you are. You just never learned it. And it really served me well. When I left him, when he sold the company 10 years later, and the new owners from Toronto, where you're from, said, oh, he's making too much money. We're going to change his pay scale. I left. And unfortunately, 2.5 years later, they filed bankruptcy. I won't wonder why, but they bought the company for many, many millions of dollars, and the two best people in the organization left because they changed both of our pays, and I've never seen such a profitable company go under so fast.
It's just an interesting. I've seen this so many times. I had a client once who he needed a salesperson, and someone in my network I happen to know was a fantastic salesperson and was looking for work, and I connected him, and the guy wanted pretty good compensation, and the owner, he said, well, he's going to be making more money than me. I said, yeah, right, in salary, yeah, but he's going to your business. And he just could not wrap his head around it. So to your point about, the obstacles that entrepreneurs make, we get in our own way. Like, this guy could have driven his business up tenfold, but he just could not get his head, like his ego, around the idea that he was paying somebody more than he was paying himself.
Right. Well, and Ben would tell me often, I made more money than he did. My paycheck was more than his, he said, until the end of the year when I collected dividends.
Yes.
And then some years he'd collect enough dividends that far surpass me, and some years he didn't. That's the problem. People have to decide what's important to them. I always figure a business person, an entrepreneur, has to decide what's important to them. Then they have to stick to it. If sales is an important part of your business, then you have to treat it like it's the important part of your business, and you have to decide.
You told me one other story, and I just want to, like, it's an extension of this. Why I think it's interesting is you went from a position, good for you to be able to take that kind of feedback, that's tough feedback to hear, that people don't like you, but to actually take that and be willing to turn it around. But then you told me another story about someone you hired who was like a Walmart security person, and then they had that kind of success. Just tell that story, because I think it's a good, the opportunity that entrepreneurs have to positively impact somebody else's life is something that I think they underestimate. And let me just tell you, I'll tell you one story first, and then you can pick up on it.
You have to hear it.
A client who, and this is one of the things I find about entrepreneurs, they don't understand how they're different from the people they hire and what makes them special. There's a kind of humility that blinds them to their own uniqueness too. And their own position. And so this is somebody, she started as an employee of the company, like you, built her way up. She wound up becoming an owner of the business. And we were talking about, relations with staff. And she actually said at one point, well, they're not going to care what I think. I went, are you kidding me? And right then, this guy walked by our office, his young guy. I said, that kid, he's 22 years old. If you go out and tell him, like I just heard about something they did, you did this thing with our IT system that saved our bacon and helped preserve a client or something like that. Thank you so much for doing that. I said, that guy is going to go home tonight and call his mom, right? And say, you wouldn't believe what my boss said to me today. And his mom is going to go, oh, honey, I am so proud of you. And he's going to be lifted. And I said, that's all because you went out and gave him some acknowledgement.
Mm.
She just had never thought about the sort of sequence, the consequences of that kind of feedback.
Right.
I know you did something with someone which really lifted them. And I just think these stories are important for entrepreneurs to hear about the kind of significance that you hold in the lives of your employees, and how your opinion matters and how you support them matters beyond them just doing their job, but at a fundamental level of their sort of self-worth.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. And I'm so glad that when you speak to clients, that's something that you tell them, because they don't understand it. And they could even have been on the opposite side of the coin, but they don't realize it when they're the person that's giving. So it's such a great lesson. I found out young in my entrepreneurial life, and this is around the story you wanted me to tell, that I could hire people for a lot of money and then arm wrestle with them and make sure that I kept them happy and the company was happy. Or I could hire people who weren't quite ready for the position, train them into the position, and then have someone who was loyal, someone who really appreciated what you gave them, and somebody who really wanted to be with you. And I started doing that right away. I learned this my first year or two of being an entrepreneur, owning my colleges. And so I say this saying, the very best salesperson that I ever hired was someone who would never qualify normally. Matter of fact, I sent her to 2 interviews with 2 other Academy of Learnings, which was the company that I owned, and they both rejected her. She worked at the airport dispatching security, and she worked part-time at Walmart. So they were both quite low paying jobs. And she just doesn't look like the person that you would think that would be a salesperson. She was brand new to Canada from India. Her name is Ritu. And it's just, no one thought to give her a chance in sales. So I thought she had an amazing personality, and I thought she was strong, and I thought, this is a great person. So I gave her a chance. I brought her in, and boy, did she do amazing. I taught her how to sell. I taught her about customer service, which she kind of knew instinctively. And then she took everything I taught her and tripled it, and just started pushing and helping and working. And if a student wasn't sure what they wanted to do, she'd call them back and she'd work with them. She'd meet with them. She goes, I don't care if you come to school or not. Just come in and talk to me. Let's find out what the answer is. And the student would inevitably end up coming to school or another school that was going to be better for that student, because not always one school is right for every single student. So what she did is she really learned sales and then just blossomed into an amazing person. She was making 10 times the amount of money with me that she was making in her other jobs. But she was such a humble person that she would never quit her job at the airport. And I said, Ritu, why? You're making so much money. She bought a condo. She bought cars. She did so well. She was a single mom. I said, Ritu, why are you keeping the job at the airport? She goes, just in case you fire me. And I said, Ritu, what do you mean fire you? You're wonderful. Not only do you do so great, but you're a lovely person. Everyone likes you. And she goes, well, you got to be careful. I got some benefits there if I need them. And I got this and I got that. And she always felt that way. That's how she always felt until she left me. And I think about, I'd say 6 years into working for me, she was doing very well, making good money. And she went to another college that was much larger than mine, and she could make a lot more money. And I never held it against her. I mean, I kind of knew one day that I would lose her, because we were a small college. We only had a couple of reps, and she went to a college with many reps. And she's still at that college she left me for. And it's been quite a lot of years. It's been probably 10, 15 years. And she's still doing very well. And she's probably the best person they have there. And that is the power of giving people a chance. That's the power of trusting your gut. Now, you can give someone a chance. If they don't work, you let them go and you thank them, and you hopefully they can find something else. But for me, giving someone a chance, watching them be successful is the greatest thing. And I figured I had a lady from another country who probably didn't have the life that she wanted. So she moved to Canada. someone that was working in a more of a minimum wage setup, but could do much, much more. She had a career from India. It wasn't like she didn't have a career in India. And
Right.
then I had someone who just pushed and worked so hard. She would work so many hours. It was unbelievable. She would work from her home. She'd work when she was in bed watching TV. She'd call a student because it popped up on her phone to call the student. So to me, I think that that's the best marriage of all things, is having an employee who just wants to do as great as they can and having an employer who really, really appreciates that. As
Mhm.
much as it hurt me to lose her, I had no choice. There wasn't much I could do. I could offer her a little bit more money, but it wasn't going to do it. She wanted something much bigger and a lot more money, and that's what she did.
And
And
it's
to
funny
this day, I
that
appreciate
entrepreneurs that have a scarcity kind of mentality are afraid of that they have a good employee who's going to leave.
it.
But there's actually, it's interesting when you see, um, I've had a number of clients, you almost call them the alumni, like the people from the organization who've gone on to succeed elsewhere. But they're always still really loyal, and they're always still really appreciative. And if you're always cultivating excellence within your organization, that's what you become known for. And you actually wind up attracting other good employees because you wind up cultivating a reputation that this is a place that actually grows excellence. Like that's like Xerox used to be that, right? If you want to be a salesperson, go work for Xerox. And it
Mhm.
didn't matter if you left them, Xerox was still going to do well, but there was that appreciation of the excellence associated with your organization.
Right. And I got to tell you, Warren, there's a company, I'm not going to mention their name, but and they're still around, who used to take all of my best employees years down the road. They would take all my best salespeople, all of them, because they could offer much more to a salesperson than I could. And I used to joke with them. I said, I'm your sales trainer. And they go, yeah, you are, Steve.
Yeah.
Right now, probably their top 5 people in their organization are people who worked for me for anywhere between 2 and 6 years. And that's life. So getting back to, you got to allow people to grow. You got to allow people to leave you. There's always going to be new great people, and everyone moves on to something else. Even as an entrepreneur, we're going to sell our companies. We may buy bigger companies. We may open more companies. There's a life cycle that we all go through, and to try to stand in someone's way because it's better for you doesn't serve you or the person that's working with you. So that's something that I think Ritu helped me understand more than anyone else, because she was one of the first people they ever took, and they took many people after her. And they didn't do it to be mean or anything awful. It was just they could, and they did. I still know the people who run that company, and they're great people. We can go out and have a lunch, but they could offer more than I could. So it was great to have the employees as long as I did. And I would train someone new, and I would help someone else out. The one thing, it's kind of like buying a home. I always tell people, and my wife, when we looked for a home a couple of times, I'd say, don't worry if this one doesn't work. There's going to be a perfect home out there for us, a perfect home. It's that like that with employees and staff members. There's always a perfect person out there for that position. You might not find them on the first go around, but there's going to be someone. And when you find them, enjoy them, and know you won't keep them forever. You just won't keep them forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
think
think
there's a concept in I think it's in Buddhism, called mudita or mudita, which
Mhm,
means it's like celebratory love, like taking joy in someone else's success. Um,
mhm.
but interesting that we don't actually have a word in our language for that, uh, telling about our culture. Uh,
Mhm.
but it's such a great thing to embrace, right? Like somebody else succeeds, and particularly if you had a role in their success or a part in that, what a great thing
Mhm.
to celebrate and feel joyous about.
Agreed. And speaking of Buddhism, I teach a concept that's called anisha, which means impermanence. And it's
Mm,
all about that too. Nothing is forever. Nothing is permanent. The way your company looks now is not the way your company is going to look in a year, 5 years, or 10 years from now. And if it does look very similar, you're probably having problems. Everything's growing. Two things happen, in my opinion. You either grow or you atrophy. You never stay the same.
right.
So you're either growing or you're atrophying. And scientifically, it's actually a scientific fact. Nothing stays the same. Not even a rock that sits on the table stays the same. So anisha is a very interesting subject. I teach this in my change management program, in my master's program that I teach. So anisha is about impermanence. Nothing stays the same. Everything changes. Everything has its path. And if you can appreciate that path, if you can move with that path and be a part of that path, I think you're going to be a lot more successul.
Nice. Well, listen,
Yeah.
you've been really generous with your time, and I'm sure people listening, we could go on for hours, I think, which would be great. But uh, let's just, I often finish off with just some real rapid fire questions. So I'll tell them in just short answers. First thing that comes to mind.
Short answers. You know me better than that, Warren.
Well, I'm going to challenge you though. All right. So one decision or action that most helped you get where you are.
Probably to put people in front of me. I think the best thing that I could have done is when I learned, and it didn't come natural to me, I had to put the people I work with before me. And I think that I've done a very good job at that. Not that I don't think of myself. I think of myself a lot. I can be very selfish, but I realize that when I put people in front of me, good things happen for me too.
Right. Good. Yeah. And if you had to do it over again, what would you change, if anything?
I'm not sure I would change anything. I've had such a fun ride in the colleges that I owned. Was such a good ride. And I accomplished different things than I ever sought out to accomplish. I think if I had to do it again, I would just maybe shoot for growing larger, shoot for helping more people. Maybe I would have stopped drinking earlier. Because as you know, I stopped drinking. I started drinking in my adult life, and it took me a while to stop drinking. I've been sober 17 years now, and I think if I would have stopped drinking a few years earlier, I may have been able to accomplish a little bit more than I did after. But I'm really happy with what we've done. I could always done better, but I'm happy with what I've done.
We're always learning. So there's one aspect of running a business you've yet to master.
Oh. So many things. I think still people, I still need to learn how to even do better than I do with people. And I think I have to learn how to make sure that I'm prioritizing the dollar in the right way. So, we're really good as entrepreneurs at saving money, but are we saving money being pound wise and penny foolish? And I think that's some things that I've always made a mistake on, trying to save money here and having it cost me on the other end of things. And when I speak to entrepreneurs, it's easy for me to talk about it. But when I try to put that in practice myself, I've made many mistakes that I think if I could just learn how to prioritize the company's money a little bit better, I think that would have been a skill that I still need to really learn how to deal with.
Yeah, cash management is, I think, one of the keys to good positioning. Actually,
yes. It's actually, I have a test called the Franchise Health Indicator, and if you go to my website, you can actually take this test for free. And it's 5 components, and one of them is cash flow, how you handle your cash. It's the first one we test on because it's such an important part of your business.
Good. One personal quality that you most had to improve or overcome to succeed.
My emotional intelligence. I had to learn how to empathize, understand, and communicate. That was something that I just didn't learn how to do when it came to work. I was good at it with friends. I was good at it with family. But for some reason, I maybe it was because back in LA, I had more of a Machiavellian leader. I just thought that the way to lead was to push and lead and push and lead and push and lead. And I think that I learned that that's not the way. If you're in it for the long run and you want to help make the world a better place and do well yourself, you can't keep doing that. It doesn't work long term.
And last one, no false humility. One personal quality that most contributed to your success.
I don't know. I don't think I have any one big quality that contributed. If I have to pick one, it would probably be that I just didn't give up. I mean, if I think about it, as a young kid, being raised by a single mom, I was by myself all day long from a very young age. Using drugs, stopping drugs, using alcohol, stopping alcohol, going back to school as an adult, buying colleges when I had no education but a high school education, sitting on boards, being the president of national boards when I really didn't have a lot of experience on boards, just pushing through, just keep pushing, always just do what you enjoy doing and push at it. That's what I think was my number one skill. And let me tell you, I failed many times, but I didn't let that stop me. I didn't let failure stop me.
I think that's one of the drivers of entrepreneurial success. Most entrepreneurs I know, if they tell you their story in depth, you're going to have some hard knocks along the way before the overnight success happens.
Many. And you'll also find out that there's no overnight successes. There are really very few of them. There's a few, but they were probably leading up to that overnight success for a long time. They laid the brick road, and then all of a sudden that happened. Like you were saying before, there was a great point that you made that they set themselves up for that overnight success. So, yeah.
Well, how can people get a hold of you, Steve?
Well, if you want to know more about our company, Franchise Leadership Center, just go to flc.rocks. FLC.rocks, and we have a franchise health indicator that's great. It's free, doesn't cost anything. We even send you a PDF with the results, and that's that. If you want to talk to us more, you can give us a phone call. We're at 604-540-6111. And or just shoot me an email at steve@flc.rocks, and more than happy to talk to you. And you don't have to be a franchise. I coach other people too, but we do work with a lot of franchises too.
Nice. I love that. .rocks. What made you choose .rocks?
Well, because a 3-letter before the at, it just doesn't exist in .com, and rocks just sounded cool to me, like just .rocks. When me and Alex talked about it, I said, how about .rocks? And he said, yeah, let's do it, So we picked .rocks, and it's been fun ever since. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time. You've been really generous, and you dropped some real pearls of wisdom that I hope people really benefit from. So thanks very much for your time. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you, Warren. Thanks for asking the questions. I really enjoyed that. That's fun. Usually I'm asking questions, so it was really nice to talk to you.
You too. Cheers.